The dawn air over Piraeus tastes like salt and pine pitch. You're standing on a stone quay as a trireme slides forward, its bronze ram just kissing the waterline, hull creaking like a living thing waking up. Oars hover, then bite in unison, and the ship leaps ahead with a suddenness that feels almost modern, like a sprinting sports car on a glass highway. If you were dropped into this harbor as a random bystander, you probably wouldn't survive a week, because Athens is about to bet its entire existence on what these ships can do. The trireme was born from fear and ambition. After the Persians torched Eretria and threatened Athens, the Mysticals pushed a radical plan: spend the Laurian silver windfall not on handouts, but onto 100 warships. That decision, debated by scholars as either visionary genius or political gamble, set up the officially recognized turning point at Artemisium and then Salamis in 480 BCE, where Athens discovered that the sea could be its phalanx, functionally. These ships were floating spears long, light, and built for acceleration. Their 3 stacked banks of oars gave them a burst speed no heavier vessel could match. Letting them strike first, then vanish. In battle, the Navy worked like a disciplined formation army. Captains aimed not to board, but to ram, hit cleanly on the flank, crack planking, and let water do the rest. The strength was shocking agility, the weakness was fragility. A trireme that lost speed became a helpless shell, and a misjudged turn could shear off its own oars like snapping fingers. So the skills required were intense. Rowers needed stamina and perfect timing. Helmsmen needed nerve and spatial sense. Officers needed to read wind, swell, and enemy intent in seconds. A strange side fact: triremes carried minimal supplies, often just a day or two, because every extra jar slowed the hull, meaning crews routinely beached at night, cooking on shore like amphibious commuters. Compared to Persian multi-ethnic fleets or later Roman quinquiremes, Athens chose a razor over a hammer: precision, speed, and teamwork as state policy. The trireme you watched pull out doesn't move because of timber or bronze. It moves because 170 human beings are about to turn breathing into propulsion. Step aboard, and the first thing you notice is the smell: sweat already baked into the wood, mingled with seawater and garlic from last night's meal ashore. You duck into the hull, and the world narrows into a long ribcage of a ship. 3 levels of rowers sit like organs in a body. Thrinites up high, Zygotes in the middle, Thalamites down low near the bilge where light is a rumor. Athens organized this human engine with a clarity that looks almost industrial. Each man had a fixed seat, and or length. Each file was a miniature unit, drilled to match the necks. The Kelliists think of him as a metronome, with lungs called the cadence, while the Aulites' flute cut through the noise to keep timing when fear tried to speed everyone up. Before the war season, crews trained in harbor and open water, rehearsing turns and bursts the way hoplites practiced wheeling in a phalanx. An officially recognized event that shows this system at work is Artemisium 480 BCE. Despite storms and confusion, Greek crews repeatedly reformed after contact, a sign of practice rather than luck. Strengths here were civic and tactical. Athens could mobilize citizens and resident foreigners into a single rhythm. So speed came not just from design, but from trust. Weaknesses were social and physiological. Fatigue ruined precision, and inexperienced crews could create or tangle, turning a sleek predator into a floating traffic jam. That's why the skills demanded were brutally specific: endurance for hours of high-tempo rowing, instant obedience to shouted commands, and the ability to keep stroke length uniform even when the enemy ram is growing in your peripheral vision. A lesser-known detail: crews sometimes rowed barefoot with leather straps to prevent slipping, and veterans could identify a ship's polis just by its rowing song. There's academic debate over how often Athens trained year-round versus seasonally. But either way, the trireme's real secret wasn't bronze, it was synchronized humanity. Compared to Spartan fleets that often relied on allied crews, Athens made rowing a civic art and a weapon. That civic art is only terrifying once it turns into geometry on the water. Picture 2 lines of triremes advancing, each ship close enough that you can hear the enemy's flute through the waves. The moment before impact is not chaos but calculation. Athenian captains wanted the ram to be the first and last argument. Their two classic maneuvers, Deiplos and Periplus, were essentially naval versions of slipping a sword through a shield wall. Deiplos, sailing through, meant punching a narrow gap in the enemy line, then snapping the helm to rake oars along the flank. If a Persian or Corinthian ship lost half its oars, it was suddenly a stunned animal, unable to accelerate or turn. Periplus, sailing around, was a wide turning attack to get behind or to the side, forcing the opponent to twist their formation until cohesion broke. We see these tactics described as operational reality at Artemisium and later at Naupactus for 29 BCE, where Athenian crews used tight turns and sudden bursts to outmaneuver heavier Peloponnesian. HULS, an officially recognized event that showcases technique over numbers. In battle, triremes functioned like a moving formation army, the line abreast. Often a single-file column turning into a front acted as the shield wall, while elite ships on the wings served as cavalry, ready to envelop. Strengths were speed, turning radius, and the shock of a clean ram. Weaknesses were situational. Open sea swells could ruin alignment, and a crowded melee could trap a trireme, so it couldn't build the speed needed for a lethal strike. Boarding was possible, but Athenians treated it like a last resort to slow, too risky for a ship built to sprint. The skills demanded were almost surgical. Helmsmen needed to judge distance and drift by eye. Rowers had to shift from cruising to full sprint on command without losing rhythm. Marines had to brace for impact and repel boarders if the ram failed. A strange side fact is that some captains rubbed oil on the ram's bronze to reduce drag in fouling, a tiny edge in a fight defined by inches. There's academic debate about how often the Deiplos was feasible in real battles, given how messy lines could become, but the Athenian ideal is clear: win by motion, not mass. Compared to later Roman boarding bridge tactics or Persian reliance on archery platforms, Athens bet on speed as doctrine. Speed as doctrine finds its purest stage in the narrows of Salamis. After Artemisium's bruising lessons, the Greek fleet backed toward the island like a boxer retreating into a hallway, and Xerxes thought he was watching prey corner itself from the shore. You'd see Persian ships arriving in glittering layers, Phoenician triremes, Ionian contingents, Egyptian heavies confident in numbers and height. The Athenians, by contrast, looked small and spare, their hulls low, their men quiet in the dark. Then dawn opens, and the sea becomes a choke point, not a plain. This officially recognized event, Battle of Salamis, September 80 BCE, is where the Athenian system reveals how it actually functions under ultimate pressure. The Mysticals' plan was tactical geography: lure the Persians into water too tight for their longer battle line to deploy. Once the Persians crowded in, their numerical advantage turned into self-interference. Athenian captains held a compact line, then surged forward in pulses, preserving the acceleration needed for ramming. Deiplos was harder in a jam, so Periplus-like swings and brutal flank strikes dominated ship after ship hitting where Persian oars couldn't clear. Strengths and weaknesses show up in stereo here. Athens' strength was discipline in confined chaos. Crews could start-stop, backwater, and pivot without losing cadence, while Persian allied fleets, less uniformly trained, struggled to keep rhythm when their own vessels blocked them. The weakness for Athens was always the same: fragility. One bad angle and a triremes ram could lodge, leaving Marines to fight hand-to-hand on a rocking deck. That's why the skills required at Salamis were not just rowing muscle but nerves. Kilustai keeping cadence amid screaming timbers, helmsmen reading eddies and gaps, ship captains deciding in seconds whether to commit to a ram or sheer away. A lesser-known side fact from ancient sources: Greeks reportedly sang the paean as they advanced, not only for morale, but because a steady chant helped unify stroke timing across the line. There's academic debate over how much of Salamis was pre-planned trap versus opportunistic exploitation of Persian mistakes. But either way, the outcome proved the Athenian comparison point, where a heavier navy might seek brute boarding. Athens turned narrow water into a weapon and made speed lethal even at close quarters. After Salamis, the Aegean doesn't just feel safer to Athens, it feels owned. The trireme turns from emergency lifeboat into everyday infrastructure of power. And you can sense the shift in the way ships leave Piraeus, not as desperate defenders, but as tax collectors with oars. The officially recognized hinge here is the formation of the Delian League in 478 BCE, when allies swore to keep fighting Persia but, in practice, tethered themselves to Athenian sea control. The navy becomes the spine of an empire, and tactics expand from set-piece battles to constant movement. In this new phase, the fleet functions like a roaming army. Triremes ferry hoplites, enforce tribute, and raid coastlines that refuse compliance. A squadron could appear at dawn, land marines, torch a shipyard, seize hostages, and be gone before a land force could respond. At the Eurymedon River battle, c. 466 BCE, Athenian commander Cimon used naval speed to smash a Persian fleet and then immediately land troops to defeat their army ashore, an event that shows how triremes stitched sea and land into one operational fabric. The strengths of this system were reach and tempo. Athens could threaten multiple islands in a season, keep sea lanes open for grain from the Black Sea, and rotate crews so the human engine stayed sharp. But weaknesses grew with scale. Ships needed constant maintenance, crews demanded pay, and distant operations risked storms, sickness, and local resistance. Skilled leadership mattered more than ever. Captains had to manage supply stops without dulling speed. Rowers had to sustain long voyages and still sprint in a sudden fight. And Marines had to switch from shipboard discipline to fast amphibious action. A strange, lesser-known fact: some league members paid money instead of ships, and that cash was often stored first on Delos before Athens quietly moved the treasury to the Acropolis in 454 BCE, turning naval contributions into marble temples. There's academic debate about whether allies consented to Athenian protection or were coerced by naval reality, but the comparison is sharp. Unlike Sparta's land-based hegemony, Athens ruled by mobility. The empire was measured not in miles of road, but in hours of rowing. Hours of rowing can buy you an empire, but they can also drain it. By the time the Peloponnesian War ignites in 431 BCE, the trireme is still Athens' sharpest tool, yet the workshop around it is starting to crack. The navy adapts, fights brilliantly, and still stumbles in ways that reveal its limits. Officially recognized events stack up like tide marks: the plague-ridden early years, the daring but costly operations at Pylos and Sphacteria for 25 BCE, the victory at Cyzicus for 10 BCE, and then the catastrophic Sicilian expedition ending in 413 BCE. Each episode is a stress test of the system you've been watching since Piraeus. In battle, Athenian tactics evolve under pressure, facing Spartan-funded fleets and Persian gold. Athens begins to rely more on sustained blockades, surprise, night raids, and mixed forces of triremes with heavier transports. The ramming doctrine remains, but captains now fight opponents who've learned to deny open water maneuvers. Spartans at times imitate Athenian drilling, while Syracusans in Sicily counter with cramped harbors and defensive booms that blunt. Speed, strength still shine. Experienced Athenian crews can outturn and out-accelerate rivals, as seen at Arginusae 406 BCE, where Athens wins a hard naval battle through coordinated line attacks. Weaknesses grow sharper. A trireme fleet needs money, trained rowers, and confidence. When pay falters or crews are rushed, the whole machine loses its edge. The skills required by late-war crews become a bit different. They still need rhythm and stamina, but also improvisation, backing water in tight channels, coordinating with land troops, and coping with longer campaigns far from home. A lesser-known side fact: Athens increasingly recruited poorer citizens, and even slaves as rowers late in the war, which helped numbers but may have strained cohesion. A point of academic debate among modern historians. The final comparison is sobering. Rome later solves fragile speed with heavier multi-banked ships and boarding tech, while Athens' genius was always the high-wire act of light hulls and perfect teamwork. When the teamwork faltered, the wire snapped. The Athenian trireme system worked because it fused design, doctrine, and civic structure into one weapon. The hull was fast, but speed alone doesn't win battles. Athens built a culture that could repeatedly produce crews with the stamina, timing, and trust to turn that speed into controlled violence in officially recognized events from Salamis to Cyzicus. The same pattern holds when Athens fought in waters where maneuver was possible and crews were well drilled. Their ramming tactics let them defeat heavier fleets and larger coalitions. Their navy functioned like a sea phalanx, cohesive lines, disciplined turns, elite wings, and a shared rhythm that substituted for armor. Effectiveness, though, was conditional. The strengths were clear: unmatched acceleration, tight turning, radius, rapid strategic reach, and the ability to blend sea control with amphibious raids. Those strengths made Athens an imperial power in a generation and kept its grain lifelines open across the Aegean. Yet the weaknesses were structural rather than accidental. Triremes were fragile. A stalled ship was a dead ship. The entire doctrine required expensive upkeep, constant training, and a supply system that could keep rowers fed and paid. Once opponents learned to fight in constricted spaces, deny open water maneuvers, or simply outspend Athens with Persian subsidies, the margin for error shrank to almost nothing. The human factor is the final verdict. Athenian tactics demanded rare skills at scale, not just strength, but synchronized endurance and instant obedience. When civic unity and finances supported that machine, it was the most advanced naval force of its age. When plague, prolonged war, and political fracture eroded that support, even brilliant captains couldn't keep every crew at Salamis-level precision. There remains academic debate about how much Athens invented naval supremacy versus perfecting existing Mediterranean practice. But the comparison to later navies is telling. Athens proved that mobility and training could outweigh raw mass. Their triremes ruled the Aegean not by being indestructible, but by being perfectly, dangerously alive until the city that animated them could no longer keep the rhythm.